This story doesn't begin with scandal, it begins with silence. A silence no camera can capture. In 2023, when Sandra Bullock stepped away from the public eye, the real reason remained invisible. Headlines speculated, whispers circulated words like retirement and exhaustion, but none captured the truth. She was grieving, privately, silently, without performance. Her longtime partner, Ryanreynolds, had been battling ALS, and Sandra kept it from the public eye for years. No social media posts, no interviews, no staged tears. When he passed in August 2023, she offered nothing, no statement, no photo tribute, no magazine feature. Only silence. But silence, it seems, can attract opportunists. Someone noticed Sandra's quiet strength, her refined grief, her unspoken dignity. That someone was Blake Lively. 2 months after Sandra's withdrawal, Blake appeared on balconies in slate-gray trench coats, her hair styled like Sandra's final press tour in 2022, her makeup minimal, eyes distant. At first glance, it seemed homage, an aesthetic nod. But then came the words, quotes from Memoirs of Grief, lines from The Year of Magical Thinking and Option B, books Sandra had quietly supported, now appearing in Blake's interviews and press features. The imitation was precise. Every gesture, every outfit, every carefully timed quote mirrored Sandra's pain. And just as quietly as Blake performed it, cracks started forming. People close to Sandra noticed. Script shifted. Magazine spreads reflected Blake's mourning aesthetic. What initially looked like tribute began to feel like image theft. Blake Lively wasn't just inspired by Sandra's grief. She was rewriting it, turning someone else's sorrow into a staged performance for public consumption. Meanwhile, Sandra said nothing. No statements, no confrontations, no media rebuttals. Yet her silence carried power. The industry remembered. Her authenticity, earned through years of private struggle, contrasted sharply with Blake's performative grief. By the time the public caught on, it was clear. The real pain had belonged to Sandra, and her quiet dignity ensured the world never forgot who had truly paid the price. Blake might have imitated the trench coat, the quotes, the aura, but authenticity, as Sandra demonstrated, cannot be duplicated. Blake Lively entered what looked like an introspective era. But for those close to Sandra Bullock, it felt all too familiar. Blake quoting The Year of Magical Thinking, a book Sandra had privately supported during Brian's illness, wasn't homage, it was calculated marketing. The tribute facade couldn't hide the intent. The real tipping point wasn't fashion, it was a script. Sandra had quietly stepped away from a Netflix project in late 2022, a drama about grief set in Montana called Where the Silence Lives. Still in development, her team had been heavily involved. Then, in October 2023, a retooled version surfaced. New title, new tone, new lead, Blake Lively, and the narrative shifted to Blake's version of grief, her take on quiet strength. At the Riverlight premiere Q&A, Blake remarked, "I've learned that silence can be powerful. You don't have to cry to show pain." Anyone who had worked with Sandra recognized that line. It was hers. This wasn't mere inspiration, it was mirroring. Every deleted tweet, every staged statement, every PR cover-up took hours of careful curation. Meanwhile, Sandra remained silent. She didn't call her team, didn't post a rebuttal, didn't even reply to stylists who forwarded Blake clips. Survivors of real loss aren't rattled by performative grief, but that didn't mean she wasn't watching. What Sandra observed was striking. A woman rehearsing a version of her life without permission. It began small, a Vogue cover where Blake quoted radical grace after grief, a phrase Sandra had shared quietly with only a select few. It escalated from subtle imitation to full narrative appropriation, each step calculated, each gesture choreographed. And yet, Sandra's silence spoke louder than any press release could, signaling to the industry that authenticity can't be faked. Blake Lively's appropriation of Sandra Bullock's grief became painfully obvious to those paying attention. Journalists never published the early cues, but the red carpet moments made it crystal clear. Blake appeared in a dark gown, minimal makeup, holding a copy of A Man Called Ove, the exact book Sandra had been photographed reading during the week of her partner's memorial. Privately, off-camera, unstaged. Observers explained that Blake's moves now mirrored Sandra's. The book, the press quotes, the solemn pose. To the outside world, it looked like branding. Behind the scenes, it felt like identity theft. Sandra remained silent. She didn't post, comment, or call attention to Blake's imitation. But the people in her orbit began distancing themselves. A producer who had worked with both quietly stepped away from a Blake Netflix short. A stylist long associated with Sandra turned down a L'Oreal campaign tied to Blake. A director ghosted her team after a table read. Sandra's influence was subtle but decisive. When she moves, she mobilizes a quiet network. Women who don't post, don't tweet, don't make noise, they just act. Blake never saw it coming. The tipping point arrived in December 2023. A charity documentary trailer produced by a women-led team and backed by Hello Sunshine centered on grief, motherhood, and recovery after loss. The original press release listed both Sandra and Blake, but when the trailer aired, only Sandra's name remained. No statements, no drama, just a decision. That silent exclusion sent a message louder than any press release. Blake wasn't just being sidelined. She was being peeled away from projects, partnerships, and conversations she had once been part of. Cracks began appearing inside Blake's team. One ex-assistant leaked to a reporter, "It's like she's dressing up in someone else's grief." Warnings had been issued internally. Blake's attempts to brand herself through quiet mourning were becoming exploitative. Meanwhile, Sandra continued to move quietly, strategically. Every time Blake posted another subtle quote about healing or sisterhood, another partner pulled back. By January 2024, the pattern was undeniable. Blake Lively had a serious problem. Her posts no longer inspired admiration, they invited scrutiny. Blake Lively's efforts to reclaim the narrative weren't working. Her campaigns weren't converting. Quotes that had once been praised for their subtle wisdom were now scrutinized for manipulation. Instead of stepping back, she doubled down. A glossy magazine cover story. A soft-spoken video interview about protecting sacred spaces. And then the op-ed in Elle, ghostwritten by her PR strategist, titled "When Grief Becomes Gossip: Why Women Need to Control Their Own Narratives." It wasn't the article itself that sparked the backlash. It was the subtext. The piece read like a veiled swipe at Sandra Bullock's documentary. If Blake Lively wants to talk about grief, maybe start by not faking it in a trench coat. The internet noticed. Even brands joined in. A European fragrance line Blake was slated to front quietly pulled out, issuing only a single statement: "We support authentic storytelling." Days later, Sandra released a 12-second clip. No music, no caption, just a behind-the-scenes moment from her documentary, holding a woman's hand, wiping a tear, and saying, "You don't have to post pain to prove you've lived it." The comment sections exploded. It was a subtle evisceration of Blake Lively, powerful, precise, and utterly silent. Blake said nothing. No press tour, no public denial, just a repost of a quote card. But the collapse was audible in other ways. Likes lower than usual, comments disabled, control over the narrative slipping away. The night of the documentary screening arrived. The auditorium was full of producers, executives, and a handful of press. No social media posts, no flashy press invites, no trailer. It was meant to be sacred, a private tribute to Sandra's late partner, a documentary stitched together over 3 years with footage from hospital visits, home recordings, and quiet, unpublicized moments. And in that silence, the contrast was stark. One woman's performative grief exposed, the other's genuine sorrow commanding the room, without a single word of PR spin. Handwritten notes, quiet moments captured on film. Sandra Bullock had one condition: no outside interference, no branding, just truth. But halfway through the final cut, something changed. A scene previously marked to be omitted resurfaced. In it, a wide shot showed Sandra crying at the kitchen table, holding the last birthday card her late partner had given her. She wasn't speaking, just sitting in private grief. Then, over that intimate footage, a voice appeared, Blake Lively reading an unrelated quote about resilience and moving forward. That voice had never been part of the original cut. That scene wasn't meant for the public eye. But there it was, projected across a studio wall in front of Sandra's peers. Her grief hijacked, her silence overdubbed. When the lights came back on, Sandra had already left. She walked out of her own screening after Blake Lively's voice appeared over her private moment. That wasn't art, that was branding theft. Producers scrambled, claiming a last-minute adjustment had been approved off-site. Blake's team called it a tribute gesture. Sandra said nothing. She packed her bag, flew home, and canceled every press obligation. But within 72 hours, the industry pivoted without a single statement from Sandra. 3 things happened. The documentary's editor was reassigned, the film's distribution partner canceled its spring release, and an anonymous memo surfaced online listing 3 names under a trust risk monitoring column. Blake's name was circled with a note, pattern behavior confirmed. Emotional exploitation. Proceed with caution. Studio insiders rarely use language like that. Then came Anne Hathaway. Soft-spoken, private, never dramatic. At a Women in Film roundtable, she said, "There's a difference between telling a story and selling someone else's grief." No names, no hashtags, but everyone understood. A week later, Florence Pugh reposted the clip, a black background with a single white flame emoji. The message was clear. Meanwhile, Blake kept posting her photos, brand deals, and behind-the-scenes content. The engagement stalled. Brands stopped tagging her. Agencies stopped defending her. Silence in Hollywood doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means everyone has already left the room. By March 2024, Blake's inner circle was running out of tools. The Whisper campaign had failed. Sandra's silence hadn't been broken. Every brand she touched underperformed. Desperation set in. Blake went to Vanity Fair, a staged photo shoot, a profile narrative titled Blake Lively on grief, growth, and learning to let go. The angle? She never meant to hurt anyone. She didn't realize how close the pain still was. But the internet saw right through it. Attempting to frame documentary hijacking as empathy only added fuel to the fire. Her carefully spun comeback narrative backfired spectacularly. PR fluff didn't save Blake. Sandra didn't respond publicly, but someone from her late husband's foundation quietly issued a statement in a charity newsletter. Grief is not a brand strategy. It's sacred. That was it. No viral tweet, no headline. But by morning, Blake's team had disabled comments on every Vanity Fair post. The message had landed exactly where it needed to. Just when Blake thought the story was fading, Sandra made a move no one saw coming. She announced a surprise project. A short film, self-directed and self-produced, titled Unlisted. The tagline, "Some stories are stolen. This one is reclaimed." No trailer, no promotion, just a 37-minute release on Vimeo with a quiet link in her Instagram bio. Inside, it was ruthless. Halfway through, Sandra plays a grieving woman discovering a clip of herself used, without consent, in someone else's art. Her only line, "Delete me." Unlisted was Sandra Bullock's classiest strike yet. No names, no press, pure cinematic annihilation. That one line, "Delete me," read as Blake Lively's obituary. The short went live on a Tuesday. No interviews, no promotion, just 37 minutes of grief, silence, and reclamation. By Friday, Blake's team pulled her from 2 brand events, citing scheduling conflicts, creative redirection, and wellness leave. Everyone knew the truth. It was fallout. The same week, a Paramount casting grid leaked. 2 roles, 1 column labeled previously considered. Blake's name was crossed out. A handwritten note beside it. Soft pass. Brand alignment concerns post-Sandra fallout. Blake was officially removed from 2 Paramount shortlists. One note literally read, "Sandra fallout." In Hollywood, grief isn't just sacred, it's untouchable. Then came the final blow, a Netflix 10-minute highlight reel re-edit. The footage carefully excised Blake's presence, subtly erasing her from the narrative entirely. The industry saw the message. Crossing personal boundaries, exploiting grief, or attempting to hijack someone's story comes with irreversible consequences. Female-led dramas for Women's History Month featured Sandra Bullock, Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, and Reese Witherspoon. Blake Lively had a scene in the early cut. But when the final edit aired, she was gone, completely erased. This wasn't a glitch. It was a deliberate cut. Blake's clip had existed in the early version of the reel. Now it was gone. A razor-sharp statement in HD. Red carpet slowed. Interviews stopped. Her Instagram engagement plummeted. One final mark of erasure. Her management's website quietly updated its client roster. Blake's photo was gone. Sandra's remained, front and center, labeled artist, architect, survivor. Sandra didn't tweet. She didn't clamor for headlines. She didn't leak emails or issue denials. She simply erased the woman who had tried to exploit her pain and told the story better. That was the point. The culmination came during a Tribeca Film Festival panel on storytelling and legacy. Sandra sat beside two young actresses and a screenwriter, calm, composed, polite. When the moderator asked, "What do you do when someone tries to twist your narrative?" Sandra didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She said 4 words. "You outright them." That line went viral within the hour. Not for the words alone, but for everything left unsaid. Every viewer who had followed the saga, from the documentary release, the deleted Instagram posts, the casting leaks, to the PR unraveling, understood the meaning. That line was a summary, a sentence, justice rendered quietly. Blake didn't respond. She skipped her next panel, ignored shifting campaign partners, and vanished from the feed. She wasn't canceled. She was outwritten. Sandra gave her a camera, a platform, and a version of the truth, and Blake told the wrong story. While Blake performed, Sandra directed. While Blake tweeted, Sandra built. While Blake acted, Sandra authored the ending. Every calculated move, every public misstep by Blake only amplified Sandra's quiet mastery. She didn't destroy Blake Lively. She let her implode. And now, after months of subtle yet relentless reclamation, the credits are rolling. Sandra's story remained intact, untouchable, and perfectly controlled. Blake's presence faded not with drama or spectacle, but through precise, unspoken consequence. The industry watched, fans understood, and the lesson resonated. Silence, strategy, and truth can outright even the loudest performance.